I don't think anyone would ever expect the Sanjeevani plant itself to have a perspective and try and tell Hanuman, hey, I'm over here, you know?
Welcome to Outlook Bibliofile. I'm Mahima Monga and we're here with Amit Majmudar and we're going to talk about his most recent book, Sitayana. Hello, sir.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. So, when we talk about Sitayana, it's written in a poetry format, right?
It's written in prose.
Okay.
But the way I've done it structurally is every chapter is told from the perspective of a different character in the Ramayana. The only character whose perspective I don't inhabit is Sri Ram himself. I did that in order to keep Ram somewhat enigmatic. But the focus is very much on Sita. She's the most frequent narrator. But everyone is involved. So you have Hanuman, Lakshman, Mandodari, basic Ravan, everybody. Yeah.
I also read that there's a perspective from a squirrel.
Right, and that's one of the things that I wanted to do. I wanted to, instead of just having the usual suspects, like if someone were to say, okay, I'm going to write the Ramayana from the perspective of all the characters, you would expect them to have Ravan and Lakshman and Sita and all of them. But I don't think anyone would ever expect the Sanjeevani plant itself to have a perspective and try and tell Hanuman, hey, I'm over here, you know? Similarly, the squirrel, that's a very famous, squirrel, and then Ram touches him and his fingerprints become white on the squirrel's back. No one would expect that particular character to have a voice, to have a perspective. I even include Indra. Indra has a role in the Ramayana insofar as he was defeated by Ravan, and then he was subsequently defeated by Ravan's son, Indrajit. Originally, Indrajit's name was Meghnad, but then he got the title of Indrajit for having defeated Indra. And so the final battle between Ram and Ravan is narrated actually by Indra, who's taking this great pleasure in watching Ravan finally get his comeuppance.
It's like a bird's eye view.
Exactly, and that allows me to follow Ram and Ravan on this sort of cosmic chariot chase, because in the Ramayana, Indra gives, actually this Indra actually loans his chariot to Ram to fight Ravan, who has the Pushpak Viman, which is something that he got from his brother Kuber, whom he deposed. And so Ravan had this superior weapon, this superior vehicle. So Indra is like, I need to equalize the battlefield, right? So that's one of the things he does. So that gave me the idea that after he loaned that chariot to Ram, he had to have been watching as Ram fought Ravan. So that's another thing that you'll see in the Sitayana.
Well, writing about mythology, and so it requires a lot of research into the subject because it's so vast.
Right.
And so I'd like to ask you, what was your process of research? What books did you read, references?
Right. So one of the great things for me for writing Hindu mythology as a practicing Hindu, is that it puts me in the parampara of Ramayana poets throughout history. Parampara is like this Sanskrit word meaning from one to the other, right? And so it's almost though it's handed down. And the peaks, there are innumerable tellings of the Ramayana in every dialect of India, modern and going back to medieval times, going back to classical times. They've done it in dramatic form, the Uttara Ramcharita, all this sort of things. But for me, the main sources were the Valmiki Ramayana, which is the original, the Adikavi Valmiki. Then there's the Irama Avataram by Kampan, which I read in translation, which is a Tamil epic, the Tamil version. And then there is the Ramcharitmanas of Tulsidas, which is also very famous. It's of the Hindi dialect. Which I kind of sort of understand, but I still kind of need translation to help me with that. And I also remember when I was a kid, there was Ramanand Sagar's Ramayana serial on television, which was this big television event. And I actually lived in India for like a year and a half when I was 8 or 9, and I remember what it was like to gather around the television. So pop cultural types of things, and then these ancient classical texts, it all kind of came together. And that's just a lot of the reading that I did. And I did a lot of that early, like in my teens and 20s. Then I wrote a Ramayana when I was in my mid to late 20s. It was a very long version. And then more recently, I had the idea to do it this way, so I did it again this way.
So you've grown up in the US, and so do you feel reading about Indian mythology and really connecting to it is just somehow keeping your Indian roots alive?
Right.
And so like, would you like to talk about your connection?
Sure. I think my connection to India is very religious. I come, my wife is even more religious than I am. She's made me more religious over the years, and we definitely consider ourselves, Hindu Americans. We're born and brought up. Both my wife and I are born and brought up in the United States. So India has a very, very strong pull for us through the religion, right? And Hinduism and India are very closely intertwined, and I think that's a lot of the draw for me. It's also it's a world that is connected to some of the deepest things I believe, and this is where so many ideas that structure the way I think about the world originated. Karma, reincarnation, all of these ideas, and then these gods and goddesses who were my gods and goddesses, right? And so mythology, the mythology of India that India produced over centuries has always been, the wellspring and kind of source of my art, and I can feel it every time I return to it. I've written all sorts of different things. I've written poems on every topic under the sun, and I've written historical fiction and contemporary fiction. I've gotten successful in that, but it never comes as easily and as fully and as I guess passionately as when I return to like the source. And I believe that the source for me and for my art is here in India.
Especially with authors, it's always said that you should write about what you know and follow that. It's like you're going to be more comfortable.
Yeah, and also another good piece of advice is to write the book that you want to see in the world that isn't there. And so I saw a need for a poetically accurate translation of Bhagavad Gita with a concise commentary that wasn't very esoteric and was clearly written. And so I wrote that, and that was God's Song. And that's come out just a few months ago here in India. And then with the Sitayana, I thought that it would be nice to have a very richly written, but at the same time fast moving and intricately structured version of the Ramayana that people could kind of that people might enjoy and that would be entertaining and have a lot of variety of voices in it. And that book didn't exist, and so I wrote that, and that was the Sitayana.
Well, it is said that Indian mythology, whatever is written, the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, it's all just a really good piece of literature which was then turned into religion at some point. So what is your take on that? Do you really feel that the religious side to it came in it had something to do with just the literature, or like the people's belief that it actually happened?
Right. So that's a very, very deep question, and we could sit here for an hour and a half while I parse the various parts of that question. I think that we need to remember that just like the classical religion of the Greeks, which had the Homeric epics as their basis, Hinduism too originally was a religion of the poets. Okay, and so in fact at one point in the Gita, Shri Krishna refers to the Kavi, which is, it's a term for a poet today, but it was also a term for like the highest level of religious understanding as well at that time. And he says even poets are confused about, he's talking about the nature of action or karma. And he said even poets even kavis are confused about this, right? And that's his way of saying, like, look, even people who really know religion don't know about this, right? And just as classical Greek religion had its basis in these supernatural epics that gave an identity to the ancient Greeks, right? The Hindus had a very similar relationship to their epics. Now, every historian will tell you that Dwarka really exists, Ayodhya really existed, right? And there's every reason to believe that Ram and Krishna really existed, right? And then on top of that, these wars, these conflicts, they certainly happened in some form, but the form in which they have power, meaning, symbolism, religious import is the form in which we know and love them, and that's in the end what matters, and that's in the end what lives. It's no coincidence that the Ramayana is being rewritten millennia later. It's because there's something different about it. It's not just history and it's not just poetry. It's some hybridization of it infused with the spirit, right? And that's what's mysterious, and scholars have a very hard time finding out what it is that makes these epics have this effect. And that's why they try and reduce it and say it's just literature, or it's just history, or it never really happened, because they're dealing with some other entity that they don't have terms for. I think that's the brief version of what I would say about that.
So these days, religion is quite politicized. And so while you were writing Sitayana, did you have that thought in mind that maybe it could have like a political backlash at some point?
No, I didn't. Primarily because, as I said, I'm an American, and I don't follow Indian politics at all, because in America, politics is so entertaining all the time, and it's just, you can't look away. So I never have looked away from American politics long enough to find out what's going on in India. So I would have to, it just doesn't even enter my mind, while I'm writing. For me, it's very much a religious thing, and Hinduism doesn't have a role in American politics the way, say, evangelical Christianity does. So Christianity is in some forms politicized within the United States, but Hinduism isn't. And so it's very much just my religion, and it doesn't have that contentious aspect to it.
Well, it was really good talking to you. Thank you so much